So now let's talk about two scenarios. The first is the person who is new to this type of training. So they've listened to this podcast, or they're one of my patients, and I've made the case convincingly to them that you really need to do this type of training. I want to come back, by the way, to a justification for that. So let's explain why high intensity training is not sufficient, but we'll park that for a moment. But they really don't have much of a background in this type of training, right? They, maybe they do some high intensity training, they do some weights, they play some tennis, but they really don't do the sort of steady state, sustained cardio that we're talking about. How would you structure a training program in dose, duration, frequency for that individual? And tell me a little bit about the choices that you would make if they're agnostic to running, walking, cycling, rowing, swimming. Again, I have my biases there, but I want to kind of hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, no, I think, that's a great question. And I also, before that, I want to apologize to many of your audience because I get a lot of emails, asking me about these questions, and it's hard to.
Well, that's why we're doing the podcast, so
yes,
that you
exactly.
don't have to apologize. So it's easier to do it this way.
I appreciate it this way, but still, I get emails, and before I used to see people here at the university, but now at the university, we don't have these services, so I'm trying to convince them that these services are important to offer to population. But anyways, I want to apologize because I cannot answer to everybody. But yeah, so I have the three main rules or parameters that I have learned over the years. So one is the duration, right? We have in mind sometimes that this is like endurance training, long days. Like I only have 6 hours a week or 7 hours a week at most, right, to do this type of training or less. So there's no way I can do that.
It's usually less because they might have 6 hours a week for total exercise.
Exactly.
And we're going to take half of that for strength training.
Exactly, which is very important, as you know. It's where I fail because I should do more of that, and I try to get a little bit more of time to do that. But it's not easy. But I aspire really to dial that in. But yeah, you're right. They might have less than 6 hours, and they might think like, well, I'm not an endurance athlete, so you need to do 4 hours to accomplish this. So therefore, I'm just going to move to do just high intensity and just get out of the way. Well, that's not completely true, right? You can accomplish very important mitochondrial adaptations and very important metabolic adaptations by exercising 1 hour, right? So this is the duration. Let's start by the duration, right? So if you try to do that 1 hour to 1 hour and a half range, you're on target.
And is that in one setting?
6 hours. I'm sorry?
Is that total or one setting?
What do you mean?
Meaning, is it 1 to 1.5 hours per week, or does that need to be in one continuous exercise bout?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me maybe go back to the frequency, right? The dose. So the frequency that I see is that this type of training ideally needs to be done between 3 to 4 days a week, ideally. What I've seen, and how can I know this? I know this because I've seen in the laboratory everything, right? The person who trains 1 day at these zones, or 2 days, or 3 days, or 4 days, or high intensity, low intensity, and I see the adaptations. How do I see the adaptations? Again, looking at fat oxidation, lactate clearance capacity, both surrogates of mitochondrial function, right? So I've been identifying the dose of that training. So if you train once a week there, chances are that you're going to deteriorate over time, and especially as we age. Something that I see, for example, in high intensity exercisers and bodybuilders, that they have a very poor mitochondrial function compared to people who do more, a little bit of everything, right? So 1 day a week is not going to work. 2 days a week, it might maintain what you have. But if you're new to an exercise program, might not be enough. 3 days a week, now we're starting to see, for sure. 4 days a week, now we're talking. Ideally 5 days a week or 6, but not everybody has obviously 6 days a week to train. But I think that we all can, you are a very busy guy, I'm a very busy guy, and we try to squeeze 4 or 5 days a week, maybe 6 in the summer, but 4 to 5 days is achievable for most individuals. And put aside an hour to an hour and a half, right? So I would say that 4 days a week is ideal, right? That's the first principle. The second principle is the duration. Going back to what I was saying, right? With 1 hour, maybe Pogacar needs 4 hours, 5 hours to keep increasing those huge mitochondria for a long time. But a mere mortal, and especially someone who might be pre-diabetic or might be out of fitness or hasn't exercised in a long time, or someone who coming from a disease or a mother who just had a baby and has been out of say for a while, 1 hour, if you walk or if you run, might be very, very good for you. 1 hour walk, or run, you might have to bring it up. That's part of the plan too, right? You cannot start off the bat with 1 hour. You might start by 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, increasing it, but maybe about an hour. And if you bike, for example, about an hour, 20 minutes, hour and a half, that's what I see, that if you do that for 4 days a week, things are starting to move.
Even if you bike on a trainer where you can be much more efficient and you can really get straight to the wattage and stay there. Because we tell patients, again, it depends where they are in their cycle, but if they're starting out, I mean, we'd be happy if they give us 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week of dedicated exercise. So do you see a difference between, I can't do zone 2 on the road. I can really only do it on the trainer. Okay. I just can't stay at a constant level on the road with starting and stopping and wind and hills and stuff like that.
That's a very good point. That's why an hour and a half on the bike, it might actually be 1 hour or so, right? Because you have all these artifacts. But you're right, when you're on the trainer, you isolate everything completely. And what I also recommend is about an hour, if you can get there. Mm-hmm. But again, sure, you might, it's to me, it feels like a torture sometimes, to be an hour on the trainer. I hate it. I like to be outside, but we have to do it. I do it. I watch a movie or just catch up on work. I have one of those special desks, right, where I can type or read articles or answer some emails. Low-key activity, because again, you're not very sharp to think very intellectually. But yeah, 1 hour might do the trick. What I've seen is in those people who haven't done much at all, even 30 minutes, 20 minutes might start moving the needle, but eventually it's not enough dose, right? It's like if the body needs more, right? So if you can get to a goal about an hour to an hour and a half, that should really work, in my modest opinion, in my experience. So that's the duration. And the third is always the frequency, which we have talked about, which is usually the zone 2. That being said, I think that it's also important to stimulate other energy systems, right? Like the glycolytic system. And again, continue with the model that we do with elite athletes. People think that elite athletes, whatever the sport are, all they do is high intensity all the time and intervals. And it's the exact opposite. If you look at the workload of an elite athlete, whether that elite athlete is, especially in individual sports, right? It's easier to see this, whether it's a triathlete or a cyclist or a marathon runner or a swimmer, right? Which is like 100-meter swimmer is under a minute, right? It's maximal exercise. If you look at the workload, it's very similar, right? The majority of the sessions are in the lower intensity. They're not intervals. And I always say we cannot be so naive to think that, the best coaches and athletes in the world haven't figured this out when they're always trying new things and they want to try the cutting edge things. Obviously, they have said our sport is swimming. It's under a minute. All we need to do is intervals, right? Well, if you look at what swimmers do, they train, and if you ask Michael Phelps, hours and hours. Because if you can travel through the competition in that under a minute with a slightly better function to clear lactate, even if it's 1 millimole or less, the muscle contracture force might be improved. So all the hours and hours might be that just to improve a fraction of a second. But anyway, so this is what I'm saying, that these concepts of the glycolytic capacity and high intensity training, they're necessary, but they're not what the elite athletes do. And if the elite athletes have the best metabolic function of any humans, why not try to imitate their philosophy of exercise?
And so just to come back to the frequency duration question, I think the answer to the following question is going to be the more frequent training sessions. But if you compared 4 training regimens that were 4 hours a week each, one of them would be 4 60-minute sessions. One of them would be 3 80-minute sessions. One of them would be 2 2-hour sessions. And then one of them would be 1 4-hour session. So it's the same total volume. Is it safe, and notwithstanding the brain damage of 1 4-hour session, is it safe to say that the 4 60-minute sessions, because it's a higher frequency, would be the optimal one there?
I would say so. I think from my experience that it might be better because it's the frequency. It's like if you take a medication, right? If you take a medication twice the dose and only 3 days a week, might not work as well as if you take the right dose but every day, right? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about the whole exercise as medicine, right? How do we prescribe that? What's the dose? What's the frequency? I'm assuming that you will have to take it as many days as possible, right? So that I would say that it's better to do that. That being said, obviously, if you have the weekend and you have the possibility, which I don't have, to do 3 hours, go ahead, right? And another thing I wanted to point out is that, for many people, they need that adrenaline, right, for training. So other people don't care, right? Other people say, wow, I love this. I don't like to kill myself into high intensity. But I think you need to do some high intensity.